Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Monster Report, a show highlighting those entertaining creatures of film history. I'm your host, Nick Adam Poling, and joining me today is my big brother, Denver Poling. How you doing, Denver?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, lean into that mic just a little bit more.
Sorry, yes.
We like to hear the nice, deep baritone of the Poling family here. So good to have you here.
Oh, it's good to be here, sir.
Yeah, fresh from Hawaii. Yeah. And back in here in Indiana, and made a little trip this week, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about, because the Monster Report, of course, we talk a lot about film history and monsters of film. And so one of the cool things that you and I have also been kind of interested in is mysteries of the real world that we live in.
Yeah.
And so, like, cryptozoology. And one of the trips you made was to West Virginia to Point Pleasant.
Yes,
And
just a beautiful town, really.
Yeah. And the mythology, or the legend, I should say, of the Mothman. And that's what we're here to talk to Denver about, because I know a little about the Mothman, but this is one of your kind of pet projects, if you will, right?
Yeah. It's a hobby, really.
Mm-hmm.
Just really interested in the whole history of the area.
Mm-hmm.
And, the cryptozoological phenomenon that is the Mothman.
Mm-hmm. And on my end, I have seen the film The Mothman Prophecies. I know you haven't, but you've looked into a lot of documentaries,
Absolutely.
books, and whatever else. So you've done some research on your own on this. And that's where, the film, I might interject a few things about the film, but
Sure.
As far as it goes, it is a work of fiction based on the writings that have been made, and that's what we're here to talk about. So tell me a little about Point Pleasant and what kind of town it is before we get into the Mothman.
Sure thing. Point Pleasant, just a beautiful, beautiful town on the Ohio River, just over the Ohio River. In fact, from Gallipolis, Ohio. Very, very old town. Way back in the 1770s. During the Revolutionary War,
Okay.
there was a settlement there, a French settlement. The name escapes me at the moment. It wasn't Point Pleasant at the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of history in that area. Just a gorgeous views too.
And of course, it's right on the edge of the Ohio River. And is there another river, I think, that connects to it?
There is.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah, I know we might come to it at some point.
Yeah.
But I know it's like a town of two rivers, so the river probably was the source of, commerce and life. I mean,
definitely,
you wanna
definitely.
Put your city next to your town or whatever, your settlement next to a body of water, and that Ohio River, and then that bridge, of course, that connects what we notice today is Ohio and West Virginia. So it's a border town. And that's interesting for us because we grew up in a border town,
Exactly,
Indiana and
Union
Ohio,
City, yes.
In Union City. So that's kind of interesting that this town ended up with the legend of the Mothman. So going back, like you said, to the war times there, the Revolutionary War times, what brought what I guess gave the town kind of a place in history, if you will.
During that time, there was a battle of Point Pleasant. So it was fought between the Shawnee and the colonists. So the colonists.
It's the ghost in
We have a little ghost.
we have the
behind us.
ghost in the mud room behind us. So it's funny that we're talking about legendary creatures that creep in the night. And here we go. Look at the doorknob if you can see it.
Jiggling doorknob there.
Yeah, it's for effect. Anyways, so the battle that waged on while I let the cat out.
Yeah. So there was a battle, more of a skirmish, if you will. But they call it the Battle of Point Pleasant. It was fought between the Shawnee and the colonists. The Shawnee had actually sided with the British at the time.
Okay.
Because they thought that the British were going to encroach on their territory.
Yeah.
Turns out that the colonists were encroaching on their territory, but at the time we were still under British rule. The Ohio River was the border between the colonies and what they had called at the time the Northwest Territory.
Okay.
So the Shawnee were part of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois Confederacy, of course, the Iroquois, the Ottawa, the Huron up north, and then in the Ohio country, the Delaware, the Wyandot, of course, the Shawnee at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this battle waged on. A treaty was signed eventually. You know, there was a winner essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was the colonists.
The colonists won, with their weapons. I mean, they had the
Right.
guns, the muzzle loading whatever guns at that time.
Sure.
Yeah, and so treaty was reached. The chief,
Cornstalk.
Chief Cornstalk. Yeah, interesting story about him. How, the treaty was signed. They went on their merry way in a sense, so that they weren't fighting any longer, and then he died for a reason.
There were a bit of a skirmish. Cornstalk and a couple of the chiefs went to go make peace. The colonist was killed, and then the 3 chiefs were executed.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this town has the dark history of a massacre of the Native American or American Indian tribes that were during that time, and this actually is bringing to mind films like Poltergeist and
Yeah, kind of.
of what's buried on the land that is right there. But being Poltergeist is a work of fiction, here we are with a actual town with that kind of dark history, and so interesting that may have led into some of the ideas of what lurks in the night, ghosts and goblins, if you will. But in this case, somewhere in the 1960s, I guess, as it progressed along, we get the legend of the Mothman, or am I skipping ahead too far?
No, not really, actually. There weren't any sightings. Something a little before that, but more in the central part of West Virginia, there was the Flatwoods Monster. I am still studying on, so I don't. Maybe next time we can talk about the Flatwoods Monster.
Oh, absolutely.
A type of extraterrestrial type.
Okay. And so, and what's interesting is when I saw the film, The Mothman Prophecies, I didn't know the connection with any kind of UFO sightings and all that, because the film didn't go into anything related to alien spacecraft or anything like that, or sightings in the air. It was all the creature himself. So interesting that there is that connection. So kind of explain that. So some of the sightings that and some of the eyewitness accounts of what was happening during that time.
Oh, so in November of 1966, there were 2 couples going to this place called the TNT area, which was a munitions storage area during World War II. There were still munitions stored in that area during the time, and a little bit of some toxic waste and whatnot in that area. But it was a secluded area, and it was a place that couples like to go to.
Oh, really?
So during that time, it was completely dark back there. It's in November in West Virginia. Very dark, no moon. But in the headlights, the couples saw what looked to them like a giant man, 7 foot tall, huge red eyes, and just enormous wings. So, of course, they turn tail and take off.
Yeah.
That's a frightening thing. So they're driving, and from what I've heard, close to 100 miles an hour, and the thing is flying after them.
Okay.
They get into town, and they think, you know what, that nobody's going to believe anything that we say about this thing. So let's just keep it to ourselves.
Right.
Next day, the sun's out, and you get a little more courage. They're like, you know what, we got to go back and see what that thing was. So they go back a second time, the night after that, run into the creature again, which will be known as the Mothman.
Okay.
Frightening creature. Again, took off of them, screeched. My daughter Lola is here.
She's off screen, but yes. Hey, Lola.
Go ahead and do the Mothman voice.
It's not as threatening as it should sound.
Okay. But the eeriness of the sounds, the sight in the dark of the winged creature, but specifically the red eyes.
The red eyes,
yes,
definitely. The red eyes were the most striking feature of the animal, or the creature, or the cryptozoological phenomenon, if you will.
Yeah, and some might even say, whether you're skeptical or not about this, psychological, that it might be in some of these people's heads. Again, if you're a skeptic, you might keep that in the back of your mind, but at the same time, those who hear the eyewitness accounts, it's like, well, why is it that people unrelated to each other would have seen the same phenomenon?
So they separated. So there were four persons, two couples. They had separated each one of them when they were making their depositions. Each one said the same exact story. Even if you had spoken about it beforehand and said, okay, we're going to talk about this, there will still be a little bit of difference between everyone's stories. This was the exact same story, down to the height, down to the red eyes, down to the fact that it flew. Just a frightening situation.
Yeah, and I always think in the film they capitalized on the red eyes idea, because when you're at night, you get flashing red lights in the parking lights, or driving lights, brake lights, and even in dangerous intersection red lights up there.
Sure.
So you'll get that, and so they kind of capitalize on that with camera tricks and all that. But it is a striking idea that these red eyes are peering into you. I also think of Darth Vader with the red glare, in his black, helmet face that he has there, and how frightening that is, and what it would do to the people at that time that, they don't have the films we have now.
Exactly. I could just imagine how frightened I would be. Just trying to drive away from it, and it's keeping up just right with you.
And to not jump ahead to another eyewitness account, but in all the eyewitness accounts I remembered hearing in the few documentaries I've watched and listened to, is that everyone seems to have one or two reactions. One, hightail it out of there.
Yes.
The other is they're so stunned and frozen that they're just paralyzed.
Again, yeah, the same thing. Something you had never seen before, something that is just enormous, and especially 1966 West Virginia. Television's just coming into, vogue and whatever like that. A lot of folks at the time didn't have television, so your imagination, I ponder, would be just going off the rails.
Exactly, and when they at times would want to describe what was happening, so much of it is like you said, it's a tall creature. They describe it in the neighborhood of 8 feet tall,
Right.
something to that effect.
Yeah.
I mean, enormous. Not something that someone could dress up like to fake this sort of thing.
Right.
They'd also describe in some eyewitness accounts, the wings flying, jumping to great heights. Didn't seem to be fearful of them in any way, like a bat or some sort of large bird.
Exactly. And later on, when scientists and professors are trying to explain what it could be, they said it could have been a sandhill crane. A sandhill crane is a large bird. Standing up, is about 5 foot tall, so a very, very large bird with red around the eyes.
Okay, yeah, but not 8.
But not 8 feet, nor glowing red eyes.
Right, at night.
Correct.
And so you got the chance to see there was the museum set up there in Point Pleasant. There is the one and only World Museum of the Mothman.
Of the Mothman, yeah.
Yeah, so that had to be pretty interesting because of what they have there. Kind of describe what you might see when you go in.
A lot of times, as soon as you go in, you're going to see the actual depositions of the 4 couples. I thought the written deposition.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So handwritten. Just amazing things. You'll see tons and tons of newspaper clippings about the sighting and then the aftermath of the sighting, which I'm sure we'll get into. Some television shows that they're showing about Mothman and about the Silver Bridge incident. And actual pieces from the Silver Bridge. The author of the Mothman Prophecies,
Keel, right?
Keel,
yeah.
John Keel.
John Keel, yeah.
Actually wrote a letter to Senator Robert Kennedy at the time about not so much the Mothman, but extraterrestrials, and it's a really cool step through history.
Yeah. And so that would have been in the 1966, I think, area.
Correct.
I think that was the big year for the Mothman, wasn't it?
Yes,
66?
that was the first actual, maybe not the first sighting of the Mothman, but the first sighting that anyone made any kind of report about.
Right. And so, seeing the written out, the physical, not reproductions of the physical,
Right.
not copies of them. They were the physical handwriting of those people with the yellowing of the paper and the yellowing of the newspaper that was during that time.
Yeah.
So cool to see those artifacts from those times that were preserved in this museum. So I'm, looking forward to seeing it myself. I've seen some photographs of it, but that's, not like being there. And we'll get into the Silver Bridge in a minute, but
Sure.
to get your idea what would you call the Mothman, and if it is something to the effect of the UFO connection. There's a lot of different ideas of what that might give a clue to the origins, if you will, of the Mothman.
Sure.
What is it you're thinking?
So there's a couple of interesting stories that go along with that. One's of course the curse of Cornstalk.
Yeah.
Which he had cursed the land after the colonists had broken the treaty.
Okay.
So maybe it's a entity from Native American folklore, kind of like the Wendigo or something like that, something along those lines. Maybe an extraterrestrial. I'm not sure. This is the first time I've heard of any. You have the Greys when regular extraterrestrials. Not as tall nor winged. Maybe the eyes. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm thinking it's more of a cryptozoological entity, something that has survived for many years and has survived due to its resilience.
And so, like any cryptozoological, there's your Scrabble word for the day, right? Is a creature that has, it's out of place with the normal, what we would consider science and nature, but maybe it does exist as a natural creature, but with its ability to be stealthy,
Right.
and all that. Cryptozoology. At a certain point, there was a creature that was called the coelacanth. That's a fish, and we knew it was in the fossil record and still alive today.
Correct.
And so
Yeah.
it's not as if that creatures that we might consider out of place haven't been discovered. Giant squids have been even discovered when they were considered mythological from paintings and stories that were
Sure.
told of the
Yeah.
sea sailors and all that. I find those interesting in that it possibly could have happened because we have discovered very large squids in the deep oceans.
Sure thing.
And so, what could it be than that some creature that could live out into wildernesses and woods that could stay hidden for so long? You would think maybe there's a large population of them, but again, what are the rules for that? So. Who knows? I mean, right along the lines with Sasquatch, I guess.
Sure, yeah, definitely along the lines of Sasquatch and the Chupacabra.
Right.
Yes. The Goat Man and
The Jersey Devil. Yeah, you got the shirt.
guys.
They got some merch when they were there, so there's quite the commerce going on. Let's see some of the merch while we're on that subject. Anyways, yeah.
we have Mothman Coffee. Very cool.
The Silver Bridge. What is it called?
The Silver Bridge Coffee Company,
Okay.
and then Mothman Blend, and then a Mothman candle. Smells like Mothman. I assure you.
Wow.
Not those posters.
And then some just beautiful artwork.
Yes, and this one that looks like the comic. I love the artwork of classic comics.
Yeah,
So very cool. And the eyewitness kind of accounts of being chased, in your classic car by the Mothman because you were parking. It's either you were out there parking and Jason is out there, Friday the 13th, because the teenagers, when they always go park, they always have monsters chasing after them.
Well, always.
So, The point is that that's a lost thing of the past, that just parking. Tell the kids these days about parking, they're like, what? Parking?
Did what? You just sat in the car and talked?
Yeah, talking.
That's what we did. Every once in a while, we listen to music too.
So, and oh, hello, got the Mothman. So yeah. Anyways, well, with that, and I'm getting a interesting sound in my microphone for some reason. It almost sounded like a chirping. Weird. Yeah, you'll have to listen to it later when in my headphones. I'm not even kidding. It's like a chirping. So tweet. Check out those red eyes over there, Lola.
Well, now that you mention it,
the night's falling here in Indiana, so maybe he followed him back. Who knows?
Oh, yeah, he's a harbinger of difficulties.
And now, before we get into the Silver Bridge, I want to talk a little about the film. And one of the things that I mentioned to you that maybe wasn't quite connecting, I mentioned the name Indrid Cold, and that was not a name you had heard before.
No, it is not.
And you were like,
yeah, I in my study, I had never actually it didn't ring a bell at all.
Yeah, because I saw that look in your face, and I was like, well, I've watched the film, and I thought maybe there was that connection, and I realized that the film took some liberties, maybe a lot of liberties, with the name and with a lot of the story of the Mothman Prophecies written by Keel. Mm-hmm. And so it was the name essentially that they gave the Mothman when he was speaking to Richard Gere's character over the phone, which is a very creepy scene, eerie in every way of the sense, because nothing is seen. Everything is understood and felt, and what you see in your head.
So it's almost telepathy.
Yes.
Almost, yeah.
Because when he's talking to Richard Gere's character, it's so frightening. It's like he can see him inside of his hotel room, and he knows what's going on. He asks, well, where's my pen? And he's like, it's in your pocket, okay? He grabs this book off the shelf, and he's like, what's line 13 of page 50? And he looks at it, and the Mothman, Ingrid, reads those very words to him.
So it's almost like he's astral projecting into,
yes,
that's creepy.
That he's, and they kind of describe the Mothman as existing on some plane of existence that's above ours, but he's aware of us and aware of our reality, like we would to an ant or something. Mm-hmm. So we are on a larger plane of existence. We have understanding that's beyond that of an ant. But can you explain yourself to an ant? Can you enter the ant's world? Or I've also heard it described as someone in a three-dimensional world trying to describe to somebody in a two-dimensional world. You draw on a two-dimensional piece of paper your stick figures, and then you can give them things. You can give them a house, give them some food to eat. Mm-hmm. And so they understand that somebody's giving them to me and communicating with me, but they don't know who I am.
Right,
and
they can't comprehend you because you're in another dimension, Yes,
so they kind of went along with the idea that the Mothman exists in that plane of existence and has that ability to enter our dimension in certain forms and in certain ways, and so such a frightening scene. But they gave him that name, and the character that's played by Will Patton is describing his encounter face to face with Indrid Cold, and how he's just grinning the whole time, and his mouth isn't moving, but he can hear him talking.
Right, and that's your telepathic,
Yeah, it's such a, and they never show this. It's all described to you, and as a viewer of that, I think that's actually more effective than actually trying to CGI it.
So what your mind can possess and what your mind can shape is always more frightening than what you actually see.
Right, and that comes from a eyewitness account. I was looking this up to make sure I was stating the correct thing about the legend, essentially, of Ingrid Cold. It seems as though, again, in the 1966, November 2nd, of an eyewitness account of a UFO and someone, a sewing machine company salesman who was traveling through West Virginia on his way home, 7:30 o'clock at night. He encounters a UFO, stops by the side of the road, sees the spacecraft and sees somebody walk out of it, and it's a man that is grinning and has this huge grin on his face, and he's knocking on the window, and he's like saying, "Open up, I mean you no harm, and my name is Ingrid Cole. Do you trust me?"
Those are the famous last words right there.
I know. And so when he's talking about, he's describing himself, we eat, we breathe, we sleep, we bleed even as you do. And he said, described himself in, some detail before heading back to his spacecraft and leaving. So leaving it with just a creepy story to tell. And he's, this man, Darren Berger, had described his encounter in many interviews. He did talk to John Keel, and it ended up in the book. And so as he went along his life, he actually encountered Ingrid Cold a few other times before his passing, actually. So this is a recurring. So it's interesting that in 1966 we had just a variety of different eyewitness accounts of just strange things happening.
Yeah.
Not just the Mothman, but it seems as though everything mysterious was happening in this area.
There were a lot of UFO sightings at the time, before and after the initial sighting.
And on top of that, we have the Men in Black making an appearance.
Right.
Not Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones.
The actual frightening Men in Black.
Right. And Mr. Woodruff, I think his name was, but anyways, Darren Dorff, Darren Berger, Woodrow Darren Berger was the man's name, and he had his encounter with the Men in Black as well, after describing his encounter with Ingrid Cole. And so some of the other encounters that you've heard about the Men in Black.
Sure. Sure. Some of the later encounters and some of the encounters that had happened after the Silver Bridge incident, or disaster, if you will. A lot of when folks had gone to the police, made a report the next day, or even that same evening, they would be visited by several men with the standard Men in Black garb. The black fedora, black suit, black tie.
The car even, I think, was black.
The black car, like a black Cadillac or a black Lincoln or something like that, So several of those.
Yeah, and they could never describe their faces.
Right, right. Sunglasses,
Mm-hmm.
and really no facial features that they could recollect.
Yeah, and so, yeah, and it seems as though anytime the things that go bump in the night, the Men in Black show up, and then there's always the idea that, were they there to cover up something?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So maybe a government conspiracy. We don't want to get into that right now, but it certainly sounds like they sent these entities, if you will, there to hush up the populace.
Yeah. And it just makes the story more and more interesting as it goes, because it's like, why was all this happening here at Point Pleasant? Some conglomeration of everything was happening, which leads us to, and as we start to wrap up the podcast, the Silver Bridge incident, or disaster, like you said.
Silver Bridge disaster. So, the Silver Bridge was a beautiful I-bar span bridge. I-bar construction, so there's a circle at the top, like an I, that's held together through a pin, and there's a redundancy all the way through the bridge. Similar to the Three Sisters bridges in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So the bridge was built in 1928. Called the Silver Bridge because of the aluminum paint. It was one of the only aluminum painted bridges in the country at the time. And it's, from what I've understood, it's just a gorgeous bridge across the Ohio River from Gallipolis to Point Pleasant. So 13 months to the day of the first sighting of the Mothman, in the afternoon, I don't remember the exact date. I probably should have looked it up, but the bridge unfortunately collapsed with many, many cars on it, with the loss of life of 46 individuals.
And it was right before Christmas, I knew. Yeah, it was in the December area.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. Just a...
I think we have the info.
Thank you, Lola. So Lola's my just my, what do you call yourself?
Fact checker.
Fact checker, yeah, fact checker. So December 15th, 1967.
Very close to Christmas. Yeah.
Yep, at 5 p.m. But one of the eye bars on the Ohio side of the river broke, causing a massive strain on that side of the bridge and causing the rest of the eye bars to collapse almost instantaneously. So the bridge kind of tilted and then tilted back and went into the water. Being built in 1928, the bridge wasn't really set up for the cars of the 60s era or any of the trucks. Your normal passenger car was a Model T in 1928. So the weight wasn't really standardized.
Well, and probably even the amount of traffic itself.
Exactly.
More cars on the road.
Yeah. A lot of folks from the West Virginia side would go over to Gallipolis, Ohio, fill up tanks because gas was cheaper on the Ohio side. Food was cheaper. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. And while you're
sorry.
while you're kind of recovering there, I remember I think it might have been on the Gallipolis side, the Ohio side. There was a traffic light issue, I think, that was actually holding up traffic.
I believe so, yeah. Mm-hmm. And
putting more weight.
Of course, holiday traffic, and just too many cars on the bridge, and that the eye bar that had broken was there was a hairline fracture in it at the time of manufacture. Nobody noticed it because it's a hairline fracture, so every time they went up to inspect it, they couldn't see it because at the time, all they could do was look at it.
Yeah.
Say, okay, well, I don't see any stress fractures or anything like that.
Yeah. It's not like the modern equipment that would detect those sorts of
like
things.
An ultrasound type thing,
Yeah, because it pretty much is hidden. And really, when you think about it, built in late 1920s, this is 1966 or...
1967.
67, so yeah, next year after the big amount of Mothman sightings. So in the neighborhood of 40-something years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you would think of a bridge lasting at least that long, but at the same time being built when it was built, under the standards that it was built
Correct,
on,
yeah.
and under the expectations of weight at that time. Maybe it was even living on borrowed time, as it were. So interesting that that happened after that, and so the Mothman connection to the bridge collapse.
So 13 months to the day,
Right.
kind of brings that in there.
Unlucky 13.
Correct. That brings up, the curse of, again, the curse of Cornstalk and whatever like that. People being more, it was the 60s, a very turbulent time, so people were being a little more violent.
Right.
A little more violence, and maybe that brought about, this entity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of unrest in the world, a lot of a lot of riots happening, cities burning. I know, especially in 1968, the next year.
Oh, definitely.
Was one of the worst for the race riots and cities burning. And so, and interesting, the Robert Kennedy connection. Obviously, he was killed in 1968.
Yeah.
So up to that point. So that he had a connection even with Point Pleasant and the area here. So so interesting that it all kind of came to a head. Now, after the Silver Bridge collapse, Mothman goes away?
No, Mothman doesn't really go away. Some more sightings after that, but not as, I don't know the correct word, popular. Mm-hmm. Its popularity surges in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And so more sightings and more eyewitness accounts and,
After the book, the Mothman Chronicles, the renewed interest in the Mothman, more interest in the supernatural, things like that.
Well, and interesting also the Mothman creature itself never has gone away. There's still eyewitness sightings. Not one photograph, though.
Exactly. And to tell you the truth, if I saw the Mothman, I'd drop my phone automatically. I don't know what to do.
Right, I know. You might see a UFO sighting, But as far, and you might photograph that, but as far as the Mothman always lurking in the shadows the way he does,
Right.
you're not going to get that. In fact, if he exists in the plane of existence that there might be, he might not show up on photos anyways.
Right.
Who knows? So,
Right.
And interesting and I'll kind of draw back to the film. The climax of the film is obviously the Silver Bridge collapse, which takes place in a more modern time. To describe an event that happened in real life in the 1960s. So, so that kind of brings the film to an end, but it describes the idea, and it was called the Mothman Prophecies because it was to the Richard Gere character and the Laura Linney character prophesied that was going to happen, or 46 people were going to die on a certain date. And then when it did happen, it was just like, okay, well, this was predicted by, this creature that we were studying and looking into and is haunting the people of this area. And so, the interest that pegged in the movie and then came back to the tourism industry for Point Pleasant, interestingly, because
definitely.
They began even having the Mothman Festivals after that.
Yeah, in September every year. There's a Mothman Festival, which I need to come back in September sometime just to hang out.
Yeah.
With fellow cryptozoological,
believers,
folks. Yeah. Believers.
I want to believe, and so and maybe I'll do an exclusive there. Who knows with the Monster Report, because I find this interesting because it is a monster, and being involved in monsters of fiction, to know that there might be a real life monster out there always has fascinated me, always interests me.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
yeah,
I made a trip just to go hang out there, just to be in the same area. And the statue there is just magnificent. It's a really, really cool thing.
And that's become kind of their, like Roswell, New Mexico. They have all of the tourism that is involved for the the UFO sightings and alien lore that they have there. And so Point Pleasant has that too. Someone might say they're just capitalizing on things. It's like, well, why not? I would say why not, because it actually gives attention to what has been haunting these people and giving a history to this town, and much like even Loch Ness itself has its its tourism industry because of the cryptozoological, I don't know what you would call it, in their little body of water over there. And so why not is what I would say, because it develops an interest in people, and then they start getting into the research, and I think it pushes us intellectually to question reality.
Exactly. It's like, is there something out there? Nothing says that there isn't, but nothing says that there is. What is real? What isn't?
Yeah. A very, very good way to kind of wrap this up. So I think this is such a cool story. I'd love to talk to you more about, some of the other cryptozoological things. And let us know out there if you're enjoying kind of this talk on some of the real life monsters, if you will. If we can do more shows on that, I'd be glad to do that, wouldn't you?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And we can always get, together on Skype and talk about these kinds of things too. So, all right. Thank you so much, Denver, for your time.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, this has been a great talk, and definitely looking forward to having you again on the show. And again, let us know in the comments what you think. Maybe you've done your own research. Maybe there was a few points that we missed. I'd love to hear from you. Feedback's always appreciated. So like, subscribe, comment, all of those things. Subscribe to our podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts and a lot of places where you can find podcasts. So definitely take a listen and see what we've got next happening on the Monster Report. For Denver Poling and me, Nick Adam Poling, we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.